All right, I'm hitting record button now, and we'll go ahead and get started. Friends, thank you for being here with us today. What an honor to have Seth Kaplan here with us to talk about his upcoming book, Fragile Neighborhoods. And the subtext there is repairing American society one zip code at a time. Today's conversation is about the the exploration of why American neighborhoods are in trouble and how to fix them, starting with the places we call home. A quick word about Seth, and then I'll let Seth introduce. You can introduce yourself and a more full-bodied biography. But we're just so grateful to have you here. Seth is a leading expert in fragile states. He's a professional lecturer in the Paul Heights School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, a senior advisor for the Institute for Integrated Transitions, and consultant to multilateral organizations such as the World Bank, U.S. State Department, U.S. Agency for International Development, OECD, other places as well, other countries and governments and NGOs. So, Seth, just to kick us off, what else should we know about you? And then maybe you can give us an introduction into, given your expertise in fragile neighborhoods, fragile states, what is it that caused you to think about writing a book about fragile neighborhoods?
Thank you, Eric. First, I'm very grateful to be with everyone today and look forward to your questions and really appreciate the interest in the topic and the book. So you have to imagine, if I may, as an introduction, I grew up and I did not have the easiest of childhoods. I was behind socially. I stuttered. I was bullied. And the end of that experience was that something about that life story was that I became really focused on relationships, and I became really focused on studying how society works. And I also became very attracted to warm places with warm relationships, warm community. And then I had a chance to travel, and I went to many countries. I was a wanderer, but I found the countries that actually were poorest, most fragile, to be the warmest. People were the most welcoming. They had the thickest relationships, thickest support structures, partly because the governments didn't work and there was political instability. And I spent many years. Eric has given a brief summary of some of the work I have done. But if you walk around Washington, D.C., where I live, and you ask people who is Seth Kaplan or what Seth Kaplan working on, they mostly would know me as the fragile states person. However, I've always thought of myself as the fragile society person because I think the success or failure of countries is really based upon the nature of their relationships. When I work on fragile states and you look at my work, it's really about how different parts of society work together or don't work together. Do they cooperate? Do they have trust? Do they build institutions? Do they build mechanisms to solve problems or achieve results? Or do they mostly fight with each other? And so that's been a really major part of my work. 2015, 2016, people in Washington or wherever I went started asking me, and you can understand why, is America a fragile state? And I said, of course not, because I traveled, I just came back from Sri Lanka, Nigeria, wherever I have been. But I thought something is amiss, and politics is not the answer. We don't look for politics for answers. Politics is a reflection of what is going on in society. So I spent many years reading books, traveling, talking to people, went to a lot of different places. And I ended up thinking that the problem was not with our state, was with our society, and in particular was with our relationships on an interpersonal basis. And we could talk more about what that means, but that's where I landed from all that focus, experience, and following my nose when it came to trying to answer that big question people kept giving me.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. And again, folks, welcome if you're just joining us. Again, great to have Seth Kaplan here. we'll be discussing his new book, Fragile Neighborhoods. And thank you again, Seth, for that introduction. Again, everyone, welcome to Bright Spots in ABCD. This is a program of Great Lakes Urban, and we serve to catalyze the asset-based community development, or ABCD, work nationally. But so Seth, that brings me to kind of a follow-up question, and that's, you mentioned Sri Lanka, you mentioned Nigeria, you've been to, I understand, over 70 countries, some of them fragile states, fragile societies, as you say. I guess, what would you say you've learned from that about social institutions, about relationships and social infrastructure?
As I said a moment ago, I think the most important lens to understand how a country or a state or a neighborhood or a community is doing is start with the relationships. Jane Jacobs, a very famous person who wrote about cities in particular, had a saying, this is not a direct quote, that if a place of neighborhood has the right dynamic, they will be able to solve their whatever problems they face. And if they have the wrong, for me, relationships, the wrong dynamic or the wrong relationships or institutions, not bringing people together, you can give them as much resources or money and they will not be able to solve their problems. And so for me, when I look at a state or I look at a place, a neighborhood, there's a lot of parallels. There's a parallels in terms of how we approach these problems, often very technical and material and very top down, or in the case of countries, outside in would be a term I use. And yet I think the most important element here is things must be inside out. They must be led by people in a place. You can think of that as bottom up. I tend to think about it as much more horizontal because it's about people working together. It's about people working together in a place, across places, many places. Our country's full of different places. And this is where institutions matter so much. Institutions could be organizations, could be a church, could be an institution like the one hosting today's event. It could be a community school, could be local government, but it also could be informal institutions. When you walk out of your door, what is the relationship you have with your neighbors, with local associations? Again, a lot of this is informal. It's not formal. When I walk around in my neighborhood, I have a feeling of joy because I know many of my neighbors. I must know hundreds of people within walking distance of where I live. From one, they're not friends, but they're relationships, people I know I can say hi to or at least wave to. And then we might meet in some association, we might not, we might just talk. But if I have a need or they have a need, we come together. So this idea that institutions are so important about how they shape our lives, how they bring us together or keep us apart. And they're the mechanisms that we need to use if we're ever going to improve a place. Sometimes we need to create them. Sometimes we need to change them. But we can't think of ourselves as individuals working alone. The more we think of ourselves as having influence over, being part of, or managing institutions, and the more we focus on improving these, thickening them, making them more relevant, increasing their reach, incorporating more people, I think the better we will be able to think about change processes that will improve where we live.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me say real quick to the audience, do feel free. If you hover over your screen, you'll see at the bottom a Q&A box, and what look like speech bubbles as an icon. Do feel free as we move through this conversation to drop any questions you have there, and so that we can make sure that we address your questions as well. So Seth, I'm wondering about, we've mentioned neighborhood a lot so far, and you've talked about institutions. And I think when you imagine neighborhood, you're thinking of a bounded sort of geography as part of a community. Can you say more about from all the research you've done, looking at the data, why is that an important, powerful sort of locus or focus, should be a focus of the work?
First, I think that we need to understand that a lot of us live in places that are not well constructed as neighborhoods. So let's just put that out there. I think we'd be much better off if we lived in a place as well as lived in a real place with a real identity, real center, real institutions, real mechanisms to bring us together, as opposed to lots of us live in what we might call a placeless landscape. A lot of America's placeless, that we don't actually, we have no way to meet other people. There's no associations, there's no activities, there's no sense of belonging. We have our house and we get up and leave, and there's no connection. So let me just put that out there. But in terms of why place matters and why the zip code, I use zip code in my title, and why neighborhoods matter is because there's enormous differences in how we are experiencing life, how well we're doing, how badly we're doing, what our whole life is like, depending upon where we live. And let me just give you a data point. There's a gap of 40 years in terms of lifespan, depending upon where you live in America. So you could live in one neighborhood and be living past 90, and you can be living in another neighborhood and not reaching 60. And just to put a practical place on that, I was speaking to an organization, a healthcare provider outside of Kansas City recently, and they were talking about two neighboring counties with a 20-year gap in lifespan. One is mid-80s, one is mid-60. They're not so far apart, yet think of the difference. So I believe neighborhoods matter because whether you have access to opportunity, whether you have access to support structures, whether a place is safe, whether you have transportation, everything about what you experience day to day. Yes, there's a virtual component today. Yes, we commute, and in some cases to go to work. But for the most part, we are experiencing life for a good chunk of time every day based upon where we live. And that impacts your health. That impacts your social mobility. If you're young and you're thinking about the future, there's so much data on terms of life outcomes based upon where you live. So if we don't build a country of flourishing neighborhoods in which everyone lives in a flourishing neighborhood, we are, by definition, leaving a lot of people behind.
Yeah, no, so yeah, really powerful. Thank you. We do have a question coming in from Jason. In terms of bringing people together, what can you share about bright spots and the structure of methods behind gathering people in neighborhoods to build a sense of belonging and connection?
I can give examples. Again, remember, every neighborhood is different. So some neighborhoods are distressed and there's a high concentration of poverty in those places. And so some foundational things are needed to address some of the problems of the actual place. Other neighborhoods are just very isolating. And but I think in either case, and they could be materially well off, and they would have what I would call social poverty versus material poverty. Again, you can have the reverse. You can have social wealth and material poverty. You can have both. You can have either. You can have neither. But in terms of the general way we bring people together, there's a lot of ways. Certainly places to meet. Certainly institutions that we can join and share. Those are easy examples. But I would say I know Eric and his organization works on a model, and I'm going to share a somewhat similar model, Abundant Edmonton, as an example. Abundant Edmonton, there was a gentleman who started in his neighborhood trying to bring people together. Basically, that means block parties, events, reaching out to people. Eventually, he got hired by the city of Edmonton, and there's a small office, and they have a structure. You can think of it as 3 levels. They have some sort of central office, and that's sort of encouraging all this work. Then you have what you might call regions or neighborhood connectors, basically people who are volunteers who are working at the neighborhood level to facilitate social activity in a neighborhood. and then they have block connectors. And so these are all volunteers except for the staff. That model is similar to, I know another organization in Shreveport, Louisiana, and it's called Community Renewal International. They're a nonprofit. They have nothing to do with the government. In fact, they might have some disagreements with the government from my experience. And they have a similar model. They have a central office they fundraise for, they have staff, and then they have, again, they wouldn't call them neighborhood connectors. They have people that are part of what they call a We Care team. They go out and they try to encourage people to connect with each other, join together. And behind that, they have what they call haven houses, and which are people who are working more at the street or multi-street level. So they have individuals, they have something about multi-streets, and in neighborhoods that have a really great need, they actually have houses, 2 houses, what they call friendship houses, with permanent staff in the neighborhood designed to encourage people to come together, solve problems together. They connect with services if there's necessary. But in any case, we can look at lots of models, but I think some model at the street, at the multi-street or neighborhood level, and certainly some presence. Sometimes it might be government, nonprofit, some physical presence with people available on a more consistent basis in neighborhoods is very important. The goal is to nourish relationships, nourish partnerships, and for more specific goals, I certainly would be encouraging of institution building, partnership building, working with nonprofits or churches, and doing things in a more institutionalized manner. So I hope we've answered your question, Jason.
Yeah, so that's thank you, Seth. I really appreciate that. And I wonder if you just to maybe lift out a little bit, something that you're looking for, and I think maybe this is part of the lens when you were selecting, because your book is you try to go practical with this, and you give practical examples like you just did.
I have five organizations, 5 profiles, and 5 entry points. So what I did was I did a few things. First, I was running a social capital group for many years. It's discussed in the acknowledgments, not in the book. And I was just meeting lots of people talking about the problems of relationships in America. And so I was getting information from there. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of research of the data, interviewing people, studying research. There's a gentleman named Dr. Raj Chetty from Harvard, who has among the best quantitative data on the success of neighborhoods. But it's not only him. There's several people that have worked on elements of success at groups in terms of specific places. For example, there's someone who studied the 1995 heat wave, Eric Klinenberg, Chicago, and he looked at 2 neighborhoods. Why did both equally poor? Why did one neighborhood have very few deaths? Another neighborhood had a lot of deaths. What was different about how people connected to each other, reached out to help each other, knew each other? What was different about the physical landscape and institutions that made those results what they were? So I looked at a lot of different people and study, and the conclusion I drew were that the 5 best entry points for change was 1 was physical and 4 were institutional. So the physical is you actually do something, change the housing, so it's mixed income housing, for example, build better parks, build better transportation, encourage more small business development or commercial activity in your neighborhood. That's places to meet, shops, as well as some local businesses. Local business is not only about money, it's about social interaction, building trust, building stakeholders in the neighborhood. All of that is very important. But there's the 4 institutions. 1 is marriage. 1 is family structure, which is sort of family as well as interfamily dynamics, hugely important, almost never discussed in this type of context, but how families support each other, very important. 3rd was the role of schools, which in some places is the main institution. If you're in a rural area, the government may not be very close to you. There's probably some churches, and there's the school. The school is the only time you might touch the government or might touch an organization with some bureaucracy behind it and some organization, and they're in the front line of dealing with many problems. Of course, you can also just build community. And I have an organization in Detroit, for example, that was trying to build a neighborhood hub as a means of strengthening relationships, addressing specific needs, but as part of a larger goal to strengthen relationships in that particular place.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think part of the lens, if I read this well, was, you're thinking about, you want sustained, if you want sustained impact, think about working within place and then building those institutional and the norms and the relationships within a place. And you find that as sort of overarching.
Yes, I think a lot of nonprofit work is very scattershot. It's also focused on individuals. I have something I actually posted on LinkedIn today. It's a recent article about saving trees, losing forests. So I think that's a very good analogy of how a lot of nonprofits or even the government works. They focus on a specific material need and they deliver specific service to a specific individual. They never think about the place. They never think about what they do. If they're helping someone and that person begins to do well, what's often going to happen? That person's going to leave, and the place is going to be arguably worse off because they lost someone who got ahead and improved themselves and they left. That's never a consideration. They also, by focusing on needs, I mean, this is a network about asset-based. There's not an attempt to find strengths or assets in a neighborhood or in a place. It's often, this is a problem, let me try to solve problems. Well, the whole mentality is let's find more problems. Let's increase the problems so there's more things we can deliver. I mean, they won't say that, they won't actually think that, but it's part of the whole thing is if we're problem-driven versus asset-driven, we have a completely different mindset. So I would think relationships and place is hugely important. The more we're able to build social cohesion, social capital, here's a term I would use, collective efficacy of a place, strengthen that. That means we have some sense of identity for the place, the collective. We have some sense of togetherness. It's not about friendships. It's about a sense of responsibility to each other, a willingness to get up. Let me just give a practical example. My wife, within the last 2 weeks, she's a 6-year-old kid, a couple of houses up on the street, on the scooter. Great kids are outdoors. Great, they're on scooters. Wrong place. There's cars that drive around the corner into that intersection or into that road. And that kid was very vulnerable, was dangerous. My wife just jumped out of the house, ran a couple of doors down, went into the street and basically chased that kid home. We knew whose kid it was. We knew what house they lived in around the corner from me. If that people who care about their neighborhood and care about the people in the neighborhood, they're doing 100 little things like that. We had a problem with one of our signals, and it was badly timed or organized because it was long waits for walkers. Bunch of people got together and they basically petitioned the county and they changed the signal. And there's hundreds of these little things about people doing things to improve a neighborhood. So again, place, if you want to have a real impact on real people, don't do it scattershot, do it focused. Don't do it materially, do it relationally. Certainly look for strengths. Institutions could be some strength, everything from economic, housing stock, some institution, a university or something in the neighborhood. Look for things that you can build on. But the key thing is you want to get scale. So scale means lots of things involving relationships in a specific place, lots of institution in a specific place. If you're everywhere, you're nowhere. If you're not focused on relationships and assets, you are likely doing things that aren't scaled up, except for delivering services to help people in need, which is not a long-term answer. It's a very short-term answer.
Yeah, that's interesting. Kind of makes me think. I feel like kind of a feeling or something in the book is about kind of a sideways strategy, and I think you even mentioned that just a minute ago. So we tend to think of I think scaling can be, if we get a lot of the zip codes flourishing, right? That's scaling.
Zip
And then
code by zip code. We all live in a place, but the places may be different. The problems may be different, but we all live in a place that for the most part, we do so little to make places better. In fact, if you look at our landscape, we actually seem to focus more on the roads and going places than we actually think about making places great. I mean, if everyone lived in a flourishing neighborhood that had a real sense of identity, uniqueness, institutions, activities brought us together, a sense of belonging, we would all be out there doing, even if it's a little bit. I'm on the board of some nonprofit. I give, there's one other organization in my neighborhood that I give us regular money to, and I might give a little bit here and there, but I have two organizations I'm somewhat involved with. One is on the board. And the point is, I consider it my responsibility as a member of this neighborhood to do something for the neighborhood. I might pick up garbage someday when I'm taking one of my kids down the street. It's a lot of little things. It's your standing up. It's about being a steward. I don't think we use this term very often, being a steward of your place, and about bringing people together in partnerships so we all are stewards of our place. We have to, if we don't do it, who is going to do it? It's not something that can be solved by policy. Yes, we want the government to help. Yes, we want to sometimes ask the government for things or ask for a change in something in the government. But for the most part, places thrive or don't thrive because we step up, we are stewards, we play some leadership role, or at least we play a volunteer role. And it involves lots of little things. And the more we build those networks of people locally and we cooperate on a specific place in a practical manner, each of us can do something. Never underestimate what every individual can do. I'm going to give one example. I know my answer is a bit long here. I live at 910 and on a street. My street is 2 blocks long, going horizontal versus vertical. So I have a neighbor who's at 903. You wouldn't think very much of her. She's not very talkative. She's not very tall, but she just runs around. I know at least once a week, she visits everybody, at least everyone she knows who lives alone. I have a house next to me. I have a woman who must be in her late 80s, and she still works incredibly, works at NASA, and she must be in her late 80s, but she lives alone. And this woman at 903, she's going around and visiting that person and many other people. I know her mother's in the neighborhood, and she, of course, that's probably why she's sensitive. If there's a cleanup of the park, she just organizes it, sends a bunch of emails. There's some email list. I don't know where these lists come from, but I get on the list. They're advertised in houses of worship. They're advertised in some local lists. There's a listserv. Actually, probably they're advertised on the listserv associations. I find out about it. And it's always she that does this thing, some volunteer thing. So the point is anybody can do anything. Everybody can do something. And you just have to have some initiative and find things to do. And in terms of the horizontal is about relationships across a neighborhood and across many neighborhoods.
Yeah, we do. I want to keep exploring that, but I want to make sure we answer a question here. Katie is asking, I'm wondering
Thank you, Katie.
Why do you refer to zip code? There's general understanding that neighborhood does not equal zip code, and the zip code does not equal neighborhood. Is it because of availability of data?
Well, you have to understand how many titles we went through and subtitles. I mean, this is about the 5th, 6th, 7th. I don't know. We went back and forth so many times with titles. So first, I have neighborhoods in the title, and we wanted another term in the subtitle. So I think it's just plain and simple. I wasn't going to use the word neighborhoods twice. And yet I wanted to use something like a synonym in the subtitle. So I don't think it has a large meaning. It is true that there's some of the data that I'm talking about is zip code based, partly because neighborhoods are not always clear. They're not clear they might be clear to people living in a place, but I can't go to a central database and tell you everyone's neighborhood, but I could certainly go to a central database and tell you everyone's zip code. I mean, we all have a zip code. We don't all have a neighborhood. We may live in a neighborhood-less place, even if it's a place. So I would say that the main answer to your question, Katie, is After whatever number of tries, that worked out very well. But it is true that there's a lot more data on zip codes than neighborhoods. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Another one's come in, Seth. Can you talk about how to reach philanthropists to help nonprofits make the paradigm shift from top down or outside in to a bottom up / inside out? Or do you think it's a waste of time to focus on philanthropy?
Debbie, that is a great question. That is one of the 64 million or whatever the amount questions of this type of work. Is that philanthropy, like most people who give money, they're looking for quantitative answers within a they're very focused on short-term results. So they want quantitative results. They want a relatively short horizon. They want something they can show off to other people. They want things that are material. It's a lot easier to do something that we're helping the hunger. Not that that's not important, or the homeless, or we're trying to help someone who's not being educated. These are relatively easier things to say we're doing, fundraise for. To say that we're helping places, it's a bit harder. It's a longer term horizon. It's about building capacity. It's about building institutions. Empowering local people is also really hard. Much easier to hire a professional nonprofit that knows all about how I work and I have a long-standing relationship with, than hiring some unknown local social entrepreneur and nonprofit. And by the way, I may say that one of there's a I wouldn't call it racism, but there's a lot of exclusion, which excludes blacks. I think it also excludes poor whites. It's not only blacks, but there's a lot of exclusion. I think that's a better word, a broader word, exclusion of people from poor backgrounds because of how philanthropy works, because they're looking for people who are very professional, very educated, knows a certain language and accountability. And that by definition means that there's a lot of exclusion. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's conscious. I just think it ends up that way from how they work. So I wouldn't necessarily give up, because sometimes you need it, but I would make a very, very good research about who you're approaching and whether what you're doing is a waste of time. There are some philanthropists who are focused on place-based work or ABC work. I would say they're in the minority, and most philanthropies do not think this way, do not work this way, and you have to find the select few, and then you have to basically learn a foreign language, and ideally they should work on small grants. I know a couple that do. I don't know about your area. I know one in Baltimore works on small grants that are designed not to deal with all the paperwork and the requirements that tend to be very exclusionary.
Yeah. Just to add too, I think part of the mix can also be, I think municipalities can be part of the answer there too. I know we have Mark on here, for example, Mark Cornelis, and we're going to have Mark come and talk about the flourishing neighborhood design work and how it's happening in Holland, Michigan, and that impact that the city is funding out of the general budget. So that's just another example of not philanthropy, but municipality getting engaged. Also, the ABCD Bright Spots in ABCD episode about Kitchener, the community of Kitchener, it might be it's an excellent example of municipalities stepping into the space. So you can go back and watch some of the old ABCD Bright Spots in ABCD episodes to catch up on some of those opportunities, those ideas.
I would just say, when it comes to government, I don't know the level of government you deal with. The more government is structured not around silos, housing, health, and human services, education. I mean, obviously you need functions, but the more they're focused around particular neighborhoods, the more likely people will work for better neighborhoods, and not just more housing units, more healthcare units. And so anyone who works in government or works with government, for government, whatever the form is, I would really encourage public officials to think much harder how they could make government structured in such a way. I give the recommendation government works around neighborhoods. I mean, however you want to define that, works with teams of generalists who know lots of things about a lot of these areas, have a long-term commitment to those neighborhoods. They're going to build relationships in those neighborhoods. They're going to work with a lot of nonprofits, individuals, local institutions, everybody to improve a place and have the functional areas serve them and serve their goals instead of just trying to have more output. And there should be some meta indicators that are used to measure the success of neighborhoods, and those teams are evaluated on the meta indicators. Much better than just trying to have more housing units, more of this, more of that. If we're evaluated on neighborhoods, we're going to think completely different. We're going to think about assets, relationships, capacity, institutions, not think about units.
Yeah, and just put a plug in. We will be going for our next regularly scheduled Bright Spots and ABCD episode in December, the first Wednesday of December. We will be featuring some of the work happening in Holland, Michigan. So you'll hear from a city lens about how to do this effectively. I will say also, Seth, you mentioned Edmonton. We're doing another special episode with Edmonton, where we're featuring and talking through the story of Edmonton, Canada. And it's almost 100-year history of strong civic engagement, originally around hockey, but how that morphed into a really strong, robust system, a robust, very dynamic, relationally based system that's creating inside out change. So that'll be an insightful conversation, and that's coming up in a month. In November.
Yeah, Edmonton. So Edmonton is interesting. I was there in May. I think Eric might have been helpful in connecting me with the people organizing a conference there. And they not only have an office in government specifically on improving social dynamics or neighborliness and stuff like that, they also have community federations. They literally have some sort of very thin layer of government, or it's an association sort of between government and people with some funding, but they have these elected community neighborhood federations, and they have an association of these federations so that there is, for every neighborhood, an association that is there to represent and work for the benefit of the neighborhood. I never saw that before. I don't know how common it used to be, but in Edmonton, it still exists.
Yeah, so let's go to some other questions that have come in. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but Bedaya asks, do you think it is more important to help those who need help the most or the needy people closest to you? I assume that those who need the most cannot be supported by the local people due to economic issues. Thank you for your answer from now.
Thank you. I think I hope I'm saying it right, Bedaya. So I apologize if that's not correct, but I think I would look at your place. So when you say distance from you, what does that mean? I mean, you could be sending money to a big nonprofit that's helping somebody in Africa. Well, that's pretty distant. If you're talking about 2 doors down versus 2 streets down, I would focus on your neighborhood. And again, about helping people in need. Neediness is not just that they are financially needy, but they could be socially needy. Again, loneliness, not having support. One of the chapters I have is an organization called Thread in Baltimore, and they literally create groups of people. They call them Thread families to help 9th graders who are the worst performing in school. Most of them have a lot of craziness in their lives because their families may not be intact, may not be stable. Their housing may not be stable. They might live in an insecure neighborhood. So if you're thinking about how to help people, there's a lot of ways to help people that are not material. Yes, the material matters. And in terms of distance, I would say think neighborhood and then think what you can have the biggest impact. Some people who are in the most need, you may not be able to have a big impact. There may be people who are a little above that, who are still in great need, that you could have a huge impact. So I would first focus on your neighborhood, and within that neighborhood, I would be thinking hard, where can you have the biggest impact? Where can you have the biggest buck, the biggest bang for your buck? And that doesn't mean money. That means your time. It could mean a little bit of money. But I think by far, in many cases, the most important thing, if we have some time and energy and capacity, is that you help people in ways. It doesn't necessarily mean material. I give money, but I think that the contribution I make in my community that's the greatest is I'm on the board of an organization. I give a lot of time. We have meetings every month. I'm on different committees, and it's very rewarding from the relationships. And I do give some money, but the money is not as important as my time.
Yeah, I wonder, Seth, we'll get to Raymond's question here in a second, but I kind of wonder, for broadly speaking, for all of us, what would you say would be a next step we could all take to be a part of the rebuilding, repairing of American society? What would you say is the next step we could all take?
Again, every place is different, so it's hard for me to tell you one thing, but I would certainly, as a starting point, I would look for either people or institutions that you can work with. Do not think that you alone have to, it depends. If your neighborhood is already somewhat socially flourishing and you have some knowledge of your neighbors, you could be like the woman at 903, where she goes out the door and she knows who's alone, and she just has created this weekly habit of visiting people, spending whatever it is, 20, 30 minutes with them. And I don't know how many doors she goes to. I just see her walking up and down the streets. And that's amazing. And that's something you could do alone if you knew the people in your neighborhood enough that you would know where to go. But often, if you're trying to do something bigger or larger, I think it's about organizing some activities. And it's best if you're really capable, great. But many of us might feel better off if we join with some organization, or we join with a few neighbors, whether that's a block party, whether that's a cleanup, whether that's, let's make up a list of things that we want to get better in our neighborhood, and how can we work together to achieve it. I mentioned the idea of the lights. I could certainly mention something, if we have problems on our street, where we basically, there always will be some people coming together, let's petition that they fix our streets, and lots of things like that. I mean, we had some problems with security in my neighborhood. So I certainly know that one of my neighbors, somebody I know, sits on some board for security for the county, and ensured that we had the police be aware of our needs in our neighborhood, and created a communication channel and made an effort to reach out. And he did that sort of volunteer on his own, but he also is involved in a lot of other organizations with a lot of other people. And so the thing is, we want to create system change. So we could do things alone, but the more we're able to work with others, create a network of change agents, the more we have this network effect, that is much more likely to have a larger impact.
And we'll get to Raymond here in a second, but can you say a little bit about, so if our next step is to start to build that network effect, to connect with the institutions, the people around us, look for the assets and the resources, build from there, 20 years down the road, what does the net effect roll into? What are you seeing from the research, from the data, from the case stories? I mean, what happens, decades on, when we take that first small step of knocking on a door? Where can it lead if we build the right sustainability into this?
I mean, I live in what I would call a joyful neighborhood. I mean, the goal is everyone should live in a joyful or flourishing neighborhood. In my neighborhood, again, I know hundreds of people, but there's a lot of things that go into that. A lot of the kids go to one of a very small number of schools. So we have what you might call community schools. My oldest, my daughter, 6th grade, maybe 3/4 or 2/3, 3/4 of her classmates are walking distance away. Parents know each other. There's WhatsApp groups for carpools, or there's WhatsApp groups for different needs that people have. And so when you're in a joyful community, a joyful neighborhood, people are just working with each other. If there's a need, people stand up, they invite each other. I can think of the time my daughter dropped her brother on his chin, very painful, on the cement in front of my house, bloody. He must have been about 2 years old. And my wife just picked him up, ran down the street, didn't know where she was going, didn't tell any of us. But as I learned out, she went to the closest nurse. She knew all the nurses in the neighborhood, and there's certainly at least a half a dozen nurses that we know in our neighborhood. How many people on this call know where their closest nurse lives? How many people in this call know could name 100 people in their neighborhood in some form? And again, these are relationships, not necessarily friends. So I mean, we have places. We have a few restaurants. We have supermarkets. We have places we meet. We have a lot of small businesses. There's just an abundance of things going on. I mean, there's parks. Go to the park. I'm always at least smiling at somebody. Going to the restaurant, at least saying hi to somebody. So the ideal thing is that we live in a place with abundance of relationships, abundance of institutions. I mean, we don't have economic opportunity in our neighborhood, but we have networks of people there to help you. You need help with your career or your resume or something. There's some, and I don't even know the details, but it's listed someplace on some newsletter that's distributed. You could call so-and-so, you can call so-and-so. Opportunities to learn together about something. Toastmasters, public speaking, there's something. His sports activities. My son goes to some soccer practice every Sunday. There's all these things going on. So we want to live in a place, the physical matters. But the idea is if you're in a place with lots of institutions and lots of networks and lots of activities, I mean, you're just feeling about the place. You're feeling about yourself. You're feeling about your everyday. It's a completely different. I look at so many places and I feel a little. I mean, it's a motivation for the book. I feel almost sad, or I'm a little bit unhappy because I look at how people are experiencing life in many parts of America, and it is not joyful. It is frustrating. It's alienating, and no wonder people are angry and unhappy, and they take it out on many organizations, politicians, politics, everything. And I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, Eric, but we want to live in a society where every place is flourishing and we feel like we belong to a place, we contribute to a place, we're joyful to be in that place.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I see Chris has a question that'll help also to look at about metrics. But let's ask this question, right? So that joyful experience that you have is part because of the dense layer of connections that people have. And so Raymond asks, how do you bring the disconnected into connection? Those who are suffering from poverty of connection, regardless whether it's material poverty or material stability.
First, I would say you have to think of social poverty as partly disconnection. I mean, there's other things that could be involved. You could be connected, but your network is not maybe negative or may not be supportive or alienating. So it's not only disconnection, but we all want to belong to supportive, strong networks that help us day to day. And so I would say first think about disconnection as a problem of network, social networks. So the things you belong to as well as social institutions. And so if someone is not, institutions incubate these networks, of course. If you see a person who doesn't belong to an institution, doesn't belong to a network, I would say your job is to encourage that person to, whatever it might be, to be a little bit less mistrustful, to be a little bit more interested in coming out. We have a lot of people who are trapped every day on their phones or their computers, and they don't want to spend time with people. They become very risk averse about relationships. We have to show, sometimes by example, sometimes by invitation, sometimes by just providing the opportunity if it's right in front of their door or something they can easily reach, and just encourage people to feel that this is worth joining, this is enticing, this is exciting. It's for me awful that people put basically games or virtual stuff that doesn't involve real people over what we might call embodied relationships, embodied existence, where we live as people with other people in a particular place. So I would say you have to make it compelling. You have to invite many times. You have to make it very easy. You have to understand that you might be overcoming some barriers. And the goal is to get the person to come, create a little bit of connection or just a little bit less mistrust, and then just repeat and gradually change the way that person might be seeing the world and feeling about themselves. If they're completely alienated from everything, they're likely had some bad experience or something, and you need to overcome that trauma or whatever it is that they've experienced.
And Seth, I think some of us who are here from the SBS community development community, we're thinking also, I think that the point where we feel most engaged is when we feel like we're giving out of our giftedness, out of our skills and experience, knowledge, and our challenges and pains that we've been through. So that might be a part of this. But we just have time for one more quick question.
For sure. Find what's special about the person and let's celebrate that specialness. Go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
And Chris asks, what are the best practice meta indicators, knowing that data collection at the very local level can be difficult? What are the best indicators, practice meta indicators?
So I think of several. The easiest is going to be relative housing prices versus comparables. It's not a great indicator for everything that you want, but especially if you're looking at an impoverished, distressed neighborhood, if housing prices go up compared to other neighborhoods in that area, it's because that place is getting better relative to other neighborhoods. That's what they used in East Lake in Atlanta and Purpose-Built Community, which is the largest network of people trying to improve whole neighborhoods in a physical form. You can also look at residential stability, basically transient rate. You can look at strength of family. What's the family structure in a neighborhood, and how does that change over time? Because that clearly has a very large cascading effect. You can try to see if local institutions are connecting people across class. Again, it depends what your neighborhood and what your problem is. You can be trying to look at anything that measures some of these are harder, but if you can measure anything about collective efficacy, some of this will require specific studies and it won't be off the shelf. Something about the connectiveness of places to other places, a place that's very isolated, that doesn't have strong transportation. And some of this you could study through social media, actually. You could study through social media how people in a place are connected to other places. And if a place is very isolated, that's probably not good. You can study the demographics of a place and how it changes over time. A neighborhood that's, again, this is more for materially poor versus if you're materially rich, socially poor, the demographics won't help you. But if you're materially poor and you see a demographics of a place becomes more mixed income, it's likely means that place is getting better over time. So there's others in the book, but those are relatively simple ones. And we could surely come up with others. And if you want to know more about that, Chris, and anybody else, find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and I'd be happy to follow up on any of these questions if you find me later and ask me by message, and I'm happy to give you more detail.
Yeah, no, that's great. And folks, pay attention to your email. We'll send a follow-up. We'll have some of the resources that have been used today. We'll send you to the LinkedIn because it really is an excellent way to keep track of Seth and where this research is going. Yeah, so pay attention to your email. I do want to, I hate to say this, but we're coming up at our time. And so, I want to wrap up with saying a huge thank you to you, Seth. I really appreciate your time with us, and it's really gratifying to us at Great Lakes Urban. I feel like we've built a framework around how to create supports for communities to implement that multi-layer approach that you mentioned, having that street level, having that neighborhood level connector, and then having a support coach or system that's there to provide support to those connectors. That's exactly what the model and the framework that we tend to that we promote and help communities work through. So that's gratifying to hear. I think we'll need to leave it at that. I want to thank you again, everyone. Pay attention to Seth's LinkedIn page. Look him up. Pay attention to your email. We'll send a follow-up with the recording. Share it with your friends. This has been powerful. It's been helpful. And then you'll also see in that follow-up email the link to purchasing the book and some other resources that Seth has compiled. So pay attention. I do want to thank everyone for participating in today's episode of Bright Spots in ABCD. And again, a special thanks to you, Seth. This has been really gratifying and helpful and insightful, and I just want to appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you, everybody, for your questions. And I see a few we didn't get to. So anyone who wants to follow up, Debbie, Jake, Chris, anyone else, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. And again, thank you so much. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. Keep at it. Keep looking for ways to have a better impact with your time. And if I can answer any questions, follow up any time. And thank you, Eric. And hopefully we will be with you and some of your colleagues in person at some point. I would so much like to do that. And thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Hey, take care, everyone. Be well.